Welcome to Tech with Koushik. This is set 3 of our SC-500 Microsoft Security Operations Analyst Associate Practice Question Series. Choose your answer before the timer ends. Then review the correct answer, detailed explanation, and exam tip. Keep track of your score and see how exam-ready you are. Each practice set is completely standalone, so you can start here without watching any of the other sets first. Playlist link is in the description. Let us begin set 3. The next item is question number 84. This question focuses on WAF rate limit rules. Scenario: an application gateway WAF v2 policy already uses Microsoft managed rule sets. The security team must throttle requests according to the geographic location of the source address, while leaving the managed rule sets unchanged. What should you configure? Available choices. Option A: a rate limit custom rule that uses geographic matching or grouping. Option B: a new Azure policy assignment. Option C: a modification to the Microsoft Managed Default Rule Set. Option D: a modification to the Bot Manager Managed Rule Set. The required response is Option A: a rate limit custom rule that uses geographic matching or grouping. This is correct because Application Gateway WAF v2 supports rate limit custom rules. These rules can use geographic source information to group or match traffic and throttle requests without modifying Microsoft managed rule sets. The alternatives can be eliminated because B: Azure policy does not implement per request WAF throttling. C: Microsoft managed default rule sets are not the place to define organization-specific geography-based rate limits. D: Bot manager rules address bot detection and should not be modified for this custom rate limiting requirement. Remember this distinction for the exam. Use WAF custom rules for organization-specific request matching and rate limiting. Managed rule sets remain platform-maintained protections. Now consider question number 85. Review the situation. An Azure subscription contains these storage accounts: Store A, Standard General Purpose v2 Store B, Premium Block Blob Storage Store C, Premium File Storage Stored, Premium Page Blob Storage. The organization plans to use Microsoft Entra Kerberos authentication for SMB Azure file shares wherever the storage account type supports Azure files. For which storage accounts can the planned Microsoft Entra Kerberos configuration be implemented? Review the options. Choice A: Store A and Store C only. Choice B: Store B and Stored only. Choice C: Store A, Store B, and Store C only. Choice D: Store C only. Choice E: Store A, Store C, and Stored only. The correct answer is Option A: Store A and Store C only. The key reason is Microsoft Entra Kerberos is an identity-based authentication method for SMB Azure file shares. Standard general purpose storage accounts can host Azure files, and premium file storage accounts are dedicated to Azure files. Premium block blob storage and page blob storage accounts do not provide Azure file shares. The other choices do not satisfy the requirement because B: neither block blob storage nor page blob storage provides the Azure file service required for SMB Kerberos authentication. C: Store B is a premium block blob account and cannot host Azure file shares. D: Store A also supports Azure files. E: Stored is a page blob account and does not support Azure files. A useful examination rule is this: Microsoft Entra Kerberos applies to Azure Files SMB shares, so first determine whether the storage account type can host Azure files. Review question number 86. Carefully. This question moves us into Sentinel hot retention. Let us first review the situation. A Microsoft Sentinel table remains in the analytics tier because it is used by hunting queries and analytics rules. Compliance requires the longest supported analytics retention period without moving the table to the data lake tier. What is the maximum analytics retention period you can configure? Choose from the following options. Option A is 180 days. Option B is 1 year. Option C is 2 years. Option D is 6 years. Option E is 12 years. The best answer is Option C, 2 years. The requirement is satisfied because for Microsoft Sentinel tables in the analytics tier, analytics retention can be extended to a maximum of 2 years. Longer total retention is available in the Microsoft Sentinel Data Lake, but that is separate from analytics retention. Now consider why the remaining options are unsuitable. A: 180 days is supported but is not the maximum. B: 1 year is supported but is below the maximum. D: 6 years requires long-term data lake retention rather than analytics retention. E. 12 years is the maximum total retention available in the data lake, not analytics retention. Keep this examination point in mind. Distinguish analytics retention, which is hot and limited to 2 years, from total data lake retention, which can extend to 12 years. Proceed to question number 87. A key vault contains these objects: encrypt key, key, disabled app secret, secret, enabled old TLS cert, certificate, disabled active TLS cert, certificate. Enabled. The security team needs an object that can be used for authentication or encryption and can use a native key vault lifecycle policy to renew automatically 30 days before expiry. Which existing object is the best candidate? The options are: Option A, app secret; Option B, encrypt key; Option C, active TLS cert; Option D, old TLS cert. The appropriate choice is Option C, active TLS cert. The reasoning is as follows. Azure Key Vault certificates support lifecycle actions for automatic renewal. Because active TLS cert is enabled, it can be used for authentication or encryption and can have a certificate policy configured to renew automatically a specified number of days before expiry. The incorrect choices fail for the following reasons. A. Key Vault does not provide native automatic regeneration of arbitrary secret values. B. The key is disabled and therefore is not presently usable for the stated authentication or encryption requirement. D. The certificate is disabled and therefore is not presently usable. Exam tip. Key Vault supports native key rotation and certificate auto-renewal, but secrets generally require an external rotation workflow. Let us work through question number 88. We are moving to AKS Key Vault CSI. Consider the following scenario. An AKS cluster must consume secrets and certificates from Azure Key Vault as mounted volumes in Kubernetes pods. The security team wants to use the Microsoft-supported Key Vault integration for Kubernetes secret mounting. Which AKS capability should you enable? Now examine the possible answers. Choice A, Kubernetes RBAC. Choice B, application autoscaling. Choice C, Azure Key Vault provider for the secrets store CSI driver. Choice D, cluster autoscaler. In this case, select Option C, Azure Key Vault provider for the secrets store CSI driver. Here is the technical justification. The Azure Key Vault provider for the secrets store CSI driver integrates AKS with Key Vault and lets pods mount Key Vault secrets, keys, and certificates as files through CSI volumes. Supported identity methods can then be used to authorize access to the vault. The remaining options are incorrect because A. Kubernetes RBAC controls Kubernetes API authorization and does not mount Key Vault content. B. Application autoscaling changes replica counts and is unrelated to secrets integration. D. Cluster autoscaler changes node capacity and does not provide Key Vault access. Enable the Key Vault secrets store CSI driver for native secret mounting in AKS. Configure workload or managed identity separately for authentication. Question number 89. Consider this scenario. A company registers a custom web application in Microsoft Entra ID. The identity team must configure the application's redirect URI and separately control which users can access the application in the tenant. Drag the management task to the Microsoft Entra object or portal area where it should be performed. Some source items are not used. The items to be placed are: Source 1. Configure the redirect URI. Source 2. Assign users and groups to the application. Source 3. Configure an Azure NSG rule. Source 4. Create a Key Vault access policy. The target positions are: Target A, app registration. Target B, enterprise application. The first mapping connects configure the redirect URI to app registration. The second mapping connects assign users and groups to the application to enterprise application. The app registration represents the application's identity configuration and is where redirect URIs and API permissions are configured. The enterprise application represents the local service principal in the tenant and is where tenant-specific access such as user and group assignments is managed. The key takeaway is app registrations define the application identity. Enterprise applications are the tenant local service principals used to manage access and assignments. Let us focus on question number 90. Next, we enter the topic of Key Vault deployment settings. This scenario establishes the key requirement. A security engineer is deploying a new production Azure Key Vault. The organization wants Azure RBAC to control data plane access and wants deleted vault objects to remain impossible to purge until the configured retention period expires. Complete the configuration. Review Statement 1. For the vault authorization model, configure the blank. The options for this statement are 1. Azure Role-Based Access Control, Vault Access Policies, or Anonymous Access. Review Statement 2. For protection against early permanent deletion, enable the blank. The options for this statement are 2. Purge protection, trusted Microsoft services bypass, or public network access. The answer to the first statement is Azure Role-Based Access Control. This selects Azure RBAC instead of legacy vault access policies for data plane authorization. The answer to the second statement is Purge protection. Purge protection enforces the soft delete retention period before permanent deletion is allowed. Remember this distinction for the exam. Soft delete makes deleted key vault objects recoverable. Purge protection prevents bypassing the retention period through an early purge. We will now analyze question number 91. Review the scenario carefully. An organization already uses Azure Key Vault firewalls and Azure RBAC. Security administrators also need Azure native threat detection for unusual and potentially harmful attempts to access or exploit key vaults. What should you enable? Compare the following options. Option A is Microsoft Defender for Key Vault and Microsoft Defender for Cloud. Option B is Key Vault Purge Protection only. Option C is Azure Monitor Diagnostic Settings only. Option D is Key Vault Administrator on every vault. The appropriate choice is Option A, Microsoft Defender for Key Vault and Microsoft Defender for Cloud. This is correct because Microsoft Defender for Key Vault provides Azure native advanced threat protection that detects unusual and potentially harmful attempts to access or exploit Key Vault resources. B. Purge protection prevents early permanent deletion but does not provide runtime threat detection. C. Diagnostic logs provide audit data but do not replace Defender for Key Vault threat analytics and alerts. D. Key Vault Administrator is a highly privileged data plane role and does not enable threat protection. A useful examination rule is this. Use Defender for Key Vault for runtime threat detection. Use firewalls, RBAC, soft delete, and purge protection for preventive controls. Question number 92 highlights an important distinction. Focus on the following situation. A company must continuously assess an Azure subscription against PCI DSS and review which controls and resources are compliant or non-compliant. What should the security team configure? Focus on the distinction between these options. Now examine choice A. Assign the PCI DSS regulatory compliance standard in Microsoft Defender for Cloud. Now examine choice B. Create a Microsoft Sentinel hunting query for PCI events. Now examine choice C. Assign security reader to all application owners. Now examine choice D. Enable only the Microsoft Cloud Security Benchmark and rename it PCI DSS. The required response is Option A. Assign the PCI DSS regulatory compliance standard in Microsoft Defender for Cloud. The key reason is Defender for Cloud represents regulatory frameworks as security standards. After the PCI DSS standard is assigned to the required scope, the regulatory compliance experience continuously evaluates applicable controls and shows compliant and non-compliant assessments. The alternatives can be eliminated because B. A Sentinel hunting query does not establish continuous regulatory control assessment. C. Security reader grants read access but does not assign a compliance framework. D. MCSB is a Microsoft security benchmark and cannot simply be renamed into PCI DSS. Keep this examination point in mind. Use Defender for Cloud regulatory compliance standards when the requirement is continuous assessment against a named compliance framework. Now consider question number 93. The focus now shifts to Defender for Cloud standards. Review the situation. A security team uses Defender CSPM and wants to implement organization-specific posture checks. One requirement is to define KQL-based assessment logic with remediation guidance. Another requirement is to group selected recommendations into an internal security baseline. Drag the Defender for Cloud object to the requirement it satisfies. Some source items are not used. The source items are as follows. Source item 1. Custom recommendation. Source item 2. Custom standard. Source item 3. Defender incident. Source item 4. Azure resource lock. Match the source items to these destinations. Destination option A. Define assessment logic, severity, and remediation guidance. Destination option B. Group selected recommendations into an organization-defined baseline. Map custom recommendation to define assessment logic, severity, and remediation guidance. Map custom standard to group selected recommendations into an organization-defined baseline. The requirement is satisfied because a custom recommendation defines the assessment logic and can include severity and remediation guidance. A custom standard groups selected built-in or custom recommendations so Defender for Cloud can assess the environment against an organization-defined baseline. Exam tip. Think recommendation equals individual assessment. Standard equals collection of recommendations used as a security baseline. Question number 94. Requires careful analysis. Identify the decisive requirement in this scenario. No Azure built-in role matches a team's requirement. You create a custom Azure role that allows selected control plane operations on virtual machines and must be available for assignment only within one subscription. Which two role definition properties are required to express these requirements? Select 2. More than one answer may be correct. Eliminate any option that fails a requirement. Consider option A, actions. Consider option B, data actions. Consider option C, assignable scopes. Consider option D, condition version. Consider option E, not data actions. The choices that satisfy the requirement are option A, actions, and option C, assignable scopes. The reasoning is as follows. Actions defines the allowed Azure Resource Manager control plane operations. Assignable scopes defines the management groups, subscriptions, or resource groups where the custom role is available for assignment. The other choices do not satisfy the requirement because B, data actions is for data plane operations and is not required for the stated VM control plane requirement. D, condition version is relevant to role assignment conditions, not to defining the allowed operations or where the role can be assigned. E, not data actions excludes data plane permissions and is unnecessary when no data plane permissions are being granted. In Azure custom roles, actions/not actions are control plane, data actions/not data actions are data plane, and assignable scopes controls where the role can be assigned. Question number 95. Scenario. A Microsoft Entra administrator must delegate management of user and group assignments for one enterprise application. The delegated administrator must not receive permission to manage assignments for other enterprise applications. Complete the least privileged configuration. The first statement reads, include the permission the blank in a Microsoft Entra custom role. Select from 1. Microsoft.directory/service principals/app role assigned to /update, Microsoft.directory/users/delete, or Microsoft.directory/applications/credentials/update. The second statement reads, assign the custom role at the blank. Select from 2. The specific enterprise application resource scope, tenant scope, or Azure subscription scope. For statement 1, select Microsoft.directory/service principals/app role assigned to /update. This permission allows management of user and group assignments to the service principal. For statement 2, select the specific enterprise application resource scope. Resource scoping prevents the assignment management permission from applying to other enterprise applications. The key takeaway is Microsoft Entra custom roles can combine fine-grained directory permissions with resource scope to delegate administration of one enterprise application. Let us examine question number 96. Treat this as a medium question. Begin by examining the scenario. Defender for Cloud Permissions Analysis identifies a developer as overprivileged. The developer currently has contributor at subscription scope, but only needs to view resources in RGApp. Which remediation best follows least privilege? Review each available choice. Choice A, keep contributor at subscription scope and add reader on RGApp. Choice B, remove the subscription level contributor assignment and assign reader on RGApp. Choice C, replace contributor with owner at RGApp. Choice D, assign security administrator at subscription scope. The correct answer is option B. Remove the subscription level contributor assignment and assign reader on RGApp. Here is the technical justification. The existing contributor assignment grants both broader permissions and broader scope than required. Removing it and assigning reader only at RGApp right-sizes both privilege and scope. Now consider why the remaining options are unsuitable. A. Adding reader does not reduce the effective permissions inherited from the subscription-level contributor assignment. C. Owner is more privileged than the stated read-only requirement. D. Security administrator is unrelated to ordinary read-only resource access and remains broader than necessary. Remember this distinction for the exam. RBAC remediation must address both dimensions of overprivilege, the role's permissions, and the scope where the role is assigned. The next key item is question number 97. The central scenario is as follows. A platform team uses Bicep to deploy a landing zone. The deployment must enforce a built-in Azure policy that blocks creation of non-compliant storage accounts rather than merely reporting them. Complete the infrastructure as code control. For the first statement, in Bicep, deploy a resource of type the blank. The available choices are 1. Microsoft, authorization/policy assignments, Microsoft, authorization/role assignments, or Microsoft, resources/deployment scripts. For the second statement, configure the policy to use the blank effect for non-compliant creations. The available choices are 2. Deny, audit, or disabled. Statement 1 should be completed with Microsoft, authorization/policy assignments. Policy assignments are the Azure Resource Manager resources used to apply Azure policy definitions at scope. Statement 2 should be completed with deny. Deny blocks non-compliant requests at enforcement time. A useful examination rule is this. Infrastructure as code can deploy governance controls too. Use policy assignments for Azure policy and choose the effect based on whether you need audit or enforcement. The next item is question number 98. A software provider hosts a TCP service behind an Azure standard load balancer. Customers in other virtual networks and subscriptions must consume the service privately over the Microsoft backbone without exposing the provider service publicly. Drag the private link resource to the party that should configure it. Some source items are not used. Review the available source items. The first source item is Azure Private Link Service. The second source item is Private Endpoint. The third source item is Service Endpoint. The fourth source item is NAT Gateway. Now review the available destinations. Destination A, Service Provider. Destination B, Service Consumer. For mapping 1, pair Azure Private Link Service with Service Provider. For mapping 2, pair Private Endpoint with Service Consumer. The provider creates a private link service that references the front-end IP configuration of a standard load balancer. A consumer creates a private endpoint in the consumer virtual network and connects that endpoint to the provider's private link service. Keep this examination point in mind. Private link service publishes your own service privately. A private endpoint is the consumer-side network interface used to reach that service. Proceed to question number 99. The focus now shifts to Azure Firewall. Consider this scenario. Spoke virtual networks route outbound traffic through an Azure Firewall policy. Workloads must be allowed to use HTTPS only to updates.contoso.com. In addition, traffic to known malicious IP addresses and domains from the Microsoft Threat Intelligence feed must be blocked automatically. Which 2 configurations should you implement? Select 2. Identify all valid responses. Choice A. Create an application rule that allows HTTPS to updates.contoso.com. Choice B. Set the firewall policy threat intelligence mode to alert and deny. Choice C. Create a network rule that allows TCP 443 to any internet destination. Choice D. Create a DNAT rule for updates.contoso.com. Choice E. Disable threat intelligence filtering. The correct answers are option A. Create an application rule that allows HTTPS to updates.contoso.com, and option B. Set the firewall policy threat intelligence mode to alert and deny. This is correct because application rules are designed for outbound HTTPS filtering by FQDN, so they can allow only the required web destination. Threat intelligence in alert and deny mode blocks traffic to or from known malicious IP addresses and domains. The incorrect choices fail for the following reasons. C. Allowing TCP 443 to any internet destination is much broader than the stated FQDN requirement. D. DNAT rules translate inbound connections and do not implement the required outbound web filtering. E. Disabling threat intelligence removes the required malicious destination protection. Exam tip. Use application rules for HTTP, SFQDN control, and use threat intelligence alert and deny when known malicious destinations must be actively blocked. Let us examine question number 100. Begin by examining the scenario. AVM network interface is affected by an NSG on the NIC, another NSG on its subnet, and security admin rules from Azure Virtual Network Manager. An administrator needs one view of the aggregated inbound and outbound security rules that are effectively applied to the NIC. Which capability should the administrator use? Compare the following options. Choice A. Network Watcher Effective Security Rules. Choice B. Azure Firewall Policy Analytics. Choice C. Microsoft Sentinel Incidents. Choice D. Azure Resource Graph Change History. The best answer is option A, Network Watcher Effective Security Rules. The key reason is Network Watcher Effective Security Rules aggregates the rules that apply to a network interface, including NSG rules from the NIC and subnet, and applicable Virtual Network Manager security admin rules. The remaining options are incorrect because B, Firewall Policy Analytics does not calculate the effective NSG and security admin rules for AVM NIC. C, Sentinel incidents are security operation records, not network rule evaluation. D, Resource Graph Change History tracks configuration changes, but does not calculate the effective rule set. When several network security controls overlap, use Network Watcher Effective Security Rules to see what actually applies to the NIC. We will now analyze question number 101. We are moving to AI Gateway in API management. Review the scenario carefully. A Microsoft Foundry model deployment must be exposed through Azure API management. The security team wants one governed gateway where it can enforce content safety and rate limit policies, and API management must authenticate to the Foundry backend without storing the model API key. Which implementation best satisfies the requirements? Choose from the following options. Option A is import the Foundry API into API management and use an API management managed identity for backend authentication. Option B is give every client the Foundry model key and bypass API management. Option C is store the Foundry key in each client application and use only an NSG. Option D is create an Azure Bastion host in front of the Foundry resource. In this case, select option A. Import the Foundry API into API management and use an API management managed identity for backend authentication. The requirement is satisfied because Azure API Management AI Gateway capabilities provide a central policy enforcement point for AI traffic. Importing a Foundry API can configure a backend and managed identity authentication, so API management accesses the Azure AI backend without distributing backend keys to clients. B. Direct client access bypasses the required gateway governance and exposes backend credentials. C. Client-stored model keys increase secret management risk and do not provide centralized AI gateway policies. D. Azure Bastion is for administrative or DPSSH connectivity and is unrelated to AI API governance. The key takeaway is for Foundry through API management. Use the gateway as the policy boundary and prefer managed identity for supported Azure AI backends. Review question number 102. Carefully. Let us first review the situation. A subscription hosts generative AI workloads using supported Azure OpenAI and Azure AI model inference models. The security team needs Microsoft Defender for Cloud to detect runtime threats such as jailbreak attempts, credential theft, and data leakage. Which Defender for Cloud plan should you enable? Now examine the possible answers. Choice A, Defender for AI services. Choice B, Defender for DNS. Choice C, Defender for Resource Manager. Choice D, Defender for Key Vault. The required response is option A, Defender for AI services. The reasoning is as follows. Defender for AI services provides threat protection for supported generative AI workloads and can generate security alerts for threats, including jailbreak activity, credential theft, and data leakage. The alternatives can be eliminated because B, Defender for DNS does not provide AI workload threat protection. C, Defender for Resource Manager focuses on Azure Management Plane activity. D. Defender for Key Vault detects threats against Key Vault resources, not AI prompts and model interactions. Remember this distinction for the exam. Defender CSPM is posture management. Defender for AI services is the workload protection plan for runtime AI threats. Let us focus on question number 103. This question moves us into data and AI security dashboard. Focus on the following situation. A subscription has Defender CSPM with sensitive data discovery enabled, Defender for storage, Defender for databases, and threat protection for AI workloads. The Microsoft security resource provider is registered. For each statement about the data and AI security dashboard in Defender for Cloud, select yes if the statement is true. Otherwise, select no. The first statement is, the dashboard can provide a unified view of data and AI resources and their security issues for the subscription. The second statement is, registering the Microsoft security resource provider is a prerequisite for relevant subscriptions. The third statement is, Azure Monitor Agent must be installed on every data and AI workload before the dashboard can display any information. The answer to statement 1 is yes. The dashboard is designed to centralize data and AI security visibility. The answer to statement 2 is yes. Defender for Cloud requires the Microsoft security provider for the subscription. The answer to statement 3 is no. Dashboard coverage depends on supported resources and Defender plans rather than a universal AMA requirement. A useful examination rule is this. For the data and AI dashboard, think subscription-level Defender coverage and resource discovery, not universal agent deployment. Proceed to question number 104. An organization uses Microsoft 365 Admin Center to govern agents. Administrators must restrict agent use to a selected group and must also review instances created from an activated agent. Complete each administration task. Statement 1. To restrict who can access agents, use the blank. Choose between 1. Agents, settings, user access, teams, messaging policies, or Entra ID, conditional access. Statement 2. To review instances created for an agent, use the blank. Choose between 2. Agents, all agents, registry and the agent instances tab, Exchange Admin Center, recipients, or Azure Portal enterprise applications. The correct value for statement 1 is agents, settings, user access. This setting supports all users, no users, or selected users/groups. The correct value for statement 2 is agents, all agents, registry, and the agent instances tab. The registry and instances view expose the created agent instances and their management options. Keep this examination point in mind. Use Microsoft 365 Admin Center agent settings for tenant access policy and agent registry/instances for operational agent management. The next item is question number 105. Next, we enter the topic of VM disk encryption. Scenario. A Windows Azure VM uses managed OS and data disks. The organization requires customer-controlled encryption keys for the managed disks and also requires the VM's temporary disk and OS/data disk caches to be encrypted at rest on the host. Which 2 configurations should you implement? Select 2. Select all answers that apply. The options are: Option A. Configure the managed disks to use a customer-managed key through a disk encryption set. Option B. Enable encryption at host on the VM. Option C. Enable only Azure disk encryption inside the guest OS. Option D. Enable just-in-time VM access. Option E. Create an Azure Bastion host. Select Option A. Configure the managed disks to use a customer-managed key through a disk encryption set, and Option B. Enable encryption at host on the VM. Here is the technical justification. Customer-managed keys let the organization control the encryption keys used for managed disk server-side encryption. Encryption at host extends at-rest encryption to the VM host, including temporary disks and OS/data disk caches. The other choices do not satisfy the requirement because C. Guest-level Azure disk encryption alone does not express the stated managed disk CMK requirement plus host cache and temporary disk requirement. D. JIT protects management ports and is unrelated to disk encryption. E. Bastion provides secure administrative connectivity, not storage encryption. Exam tip. Use customer-managed keys when the organization must control disk encryption keys. Use encryption at host when temporary disks and host-side caches must also be encrypted at rest. Let us work through question number 106. Consider the following scenario. Administrators need occasional RDP and SSH access to Azure virtual machines. The management ports should remain closed during normal operation and open only after an approved request from a specified source IP for a limited time. Which Defender for Cloud capability should you configure? Review each available choice. Option A is just-in-time VM access. Option B is Azure Bastion shareable links. Option C is Network Watcher packet capture. Option D is Defender for storage malware scanning. The appropriate choice is option A, just-in-time VM access. Just-in-time VM access in Defender for Servers Plan 2 reduces exposure by locking down management ports and opening approved ports only for the requested source and time window. Now consider why the remaining options are unsuitable. B. Bastion can provide managed remote connectivity, but does not implement the requested temporary opening of protected management ports. C. Packet capture is diagnostic and does not enforce temporary access. D. Defender for storage is unrelated to VM management port exposure. JIT answers the question, when and from where may a management port open? Bastion answers, how can an administrator connect without exposing RDP SSH directly to the internet? Let us work through question number 107. This one is marked hard. Eliminate the options systematically. Let us first review the situation. A security team is hardening supported Generation 2 Azure virtual machines with Trusted Launch and wants to understand the purpose of its security features. Drag each Trusted Launch feature to its primary security function. Begin with the following source items. Source 1, Secure Boot. Source 2, VTPM. Source 3, Integrity Monitoring. The destination requirements are as follows. Target A, allow only trusted, signed boot components to load. Target B, store protected measurements and keys used for attestation. Target C, use guest attestation to monitor boot integrity and surface health or integrity findings. The correct destination for Secure Boot is allow only trusted, signed boot components to load. The correct destination for VTPM is store protected measurements and keys used for attestation. The correct destination for integrity monitoring is use guest attestation to monitor boot integrity and surface health or integrity findings. This is correct because Secure Boot validates trusted boot software. VTPM provides a protected TPM 2.0 compatible environment for keys and boot measurements. Integrity monitoring uses guest attestation to validate Trusted Launch boot state and expose integrity health in Defender for Cloud. The key takeaway is Trusted Launch combines prevention at boot, Secure Boot, trusted measurements, VTPM, and verification/monitoring, guest attestation, and integrity monitoring. Review question number 108. Carefully. Consider the following scenario. An organization operates AKS clusters and wants one Defender for Cloud plan that provides container image vulnerability assessment, Kubernetes configuration/posture findings, and runtime threat protection. Which plan should be enabled? Review each available choice. Choice A, Microsoft Defender for Containers. Choice B, Microsoft Defender for Servers. Choice C, Microsoft Defender for App Service. Choice D, Foundational CSPM only. The best answer is option A, Microsoft Defender for Containers. The key reason is Defender for Containers provides security capabilities for Kubernetes workloads including image vulnerability assessment, security posture and configuration findings, and runtime security signals and alerts. The incorrect choices fail for the following reasons. B. Defender for Servers protects server workloads rather than providing the full Kubernetes and container workload protection stack. C. Defender for App Service protects app service workloads. D. Foundational CSPM supplies posture capabilities, but does not provide the complete Defender for Containers runtime protection requirement. Remember this distinction for the exam. When a Kubernetes question combines posture, image vulnerabilities, and runtime threats, Defender for Containers is the workload protection plan to recognize. Now consider question number 109. We are moving to serverless container security. Review the situation. A team uses Azure Container Instances, ACI, and Azure Container Apps. The ACI container group must pull from a private Azure container registry without storing registry credentials. The container app must call Azure Key Vault without embedding a secret in the application configuration. Complete the secure identity configuration. The first statement reads, for the ACI image pull, use the blank. Choose between 1. Managed identity authenticated image pull, the ACR admin username and password, or anonymous registry pull. The second statement reads, for the container app access to Key Vault, use the blank. Choose between 2. A managed identity, a hard-coded client secret, or an account-level storage key. Statement 1 should be completed with managed identity authenticated image pull. This provides Microsoft Entra-based registry authentication without embedded AC or credentials. Statement 2 should be completed with a managed identity. Managed identity provides Azure managed workload authentication and can receive least privileged Key Vault access. A useful examination rule is this. For ACI and container apps, prefer managed identity over long-lived registry passwords or application secrets whenever the target service supports Microsoft Entra authentication. Let us examine question number 110. Begin by examining the scenario. An Azure App Service web app must be reachable only through a private IP from approved virtual networks. The public app service endpoint must not accept traffic. Which 2 configurations should you implement? Select 2. Choose every option that satisfies the requirement. Now examine the possible answers. Option A is create a private endpoint for the web app. Option B is disable public network access for the web app. Option C is add an allow all public access restriction. Option D is configure only outbound virtual network integration. Option E is add an Azure NAT gateway to the integration subnet. The required selections are Option A, create a private endpoint for the web app, and Option B, disable public network access for the web app. The requirement is satisfied because a private endpoint provides private inbound connectivity to app service through a private IP in the virtual network. Disabling public network access prevents clients from using the default public endpoint. The remaining options are incorrect because C, an allow-all rule contradicts the private-only requirement. D, VNet integration is primarily outbound connectivity from the app and does not create a private inbound endpoint. E, NAT gateway controls outbound source addresses and does not provide private inbound app service access. Keep this examination point in mind. For app service private-only inbound access, combine a private endpoint with disabled public network access. VNet integration solves a different outbound connectivity problem. Question number 111. Next, we enter the topic of API management security. Consider this scenario. An API management instance has a system-assigned managed identity. A backend API is protected by Microsoft Entra ID. API management must obtain an access token for the backend and forward it in the authorization header without storing a client secret. Which API management policy should you use? Available choices. Choice A, authentication managed identity. Choice B, validate JWT. Choice C, set backend service. Choice D, rate limit by key. The correct answer is Option A, authentication managed identity. The reasoning is as follows. The authentication managed identity policy uses the API management managed identity to obtain a Microsoft Entra access token for the configured backend resource and sets the token in the authorization header. B, validate JWT validates an incoming token and does not obtain a backend token using the API management identity. C, set backend service changes the backend target but does not authenticate with Microsoft Entra ID. D, rate limit by key controls request volume rather than backend authentication. Exam tip. For API to backend Microsoft Entra authentication without stored secrets, recognize authentication managed identity. We will now analyze question number 112. Review the scenario carefully. A premium Azure container registry will host production images for Azure workloads. For each statement, select yes if the statement is true. Otherwise, select no. Statement 1. A private endpoint can provide private registry access and public network access can then be disabled. Statement 2. The registry admin account is the recommended shared authentication method for production CI/CD pipelines. Statement 3. Supported Azure services can use managed identities for unattended authentication to the registry. For the first statement, choose yes. Premium ACR supports Azure Private Link and Private Registry endpoints. For the second statement, choose no. The admin account is broad and shared. Microsoft recommends identity-based methods such as service principals or managed identities for automation. For the third statement, choose yes. Managed identity is a supported Microsoft Entra-based ACR authentication method for compatible Azure services. Modern ACR security favors private networking plus Microsoft Entra identities. Treat the admin account as an exception, not the default. Let us work through question number 113. The focus now shifts to Microsoft Sentinel Workspace. Consider the following scenario. An organization is onboarding Microsoft Sentinel for the first time and will use the Microsoft Defender portal for day-to-day access. For each statement, select yes if the statement is true. Otherwise, select no. Review Statement 1. Microsoft Sentinel is onboarded to a log analytics workspace. Review Statement 2. A Content Hub solution must be installed before Microsoft Sentinel can be added to the log analytics workspace. Review Statement 3. The Defender portal can display the Microsoft Sentinel workspaces onboarded to the tenant. Statement 1. The answer is yes. Sentinel uses the selected log analytics workspace as its workspace data foundation. Statement 2. The answer is no. Content Hub is used after onboarding to acquire solution content. Statement 3. The answer is yes. Sentinel workspace configuration is available in the Defender portal. The key takeaway is the basic Sentinel sequence is workspace first, Sentinel onboarding second, then solutions/connectors/content. The next item is question number 114. Review the situation. ASOC wants to deploy a Microsoft-maintained package that contains a data connector together with related analytics templates, workbooks, and automation content, and wants the package to support centralized lifecycle management. Where should the SOC acquire the package? Review the options. Option A, Microsoft Sentinel Content Hub. Option B, Azure Network Watcher. Option C, Microsoft Entra Authentication Methods. Option D, Defender for Cloud Regulatory Compliance. In this case, select Option A, Microsoft Sentinel Content Hub. Here is the technical justification. Content Hub is Microsoft Sentinel's centralized location for discovering, installing, and managing out-of-the-box solutions and content such as data connectors, analytics rules, workbooks, and automation components. The alternatives can be eliminated because B, Network Watcher provides Azure networking diagnostics. C, Authentication Methods configures Microsoft Entra authentication. D, Regulatory Compliance evaluates security standards and frameworks rather than deploying Sentinel solution content. Remember this distinction for the exam. If the question describes a packaged Sentinel solution with connectors plus related content, think Content Hub. Review question number 115. Carefully. This question moves us into Sentinel Azure connectors. Let us first review the situation. A security team wants subscription Azure activity events ingested into Microsoft Sentinel by using the current solution-based connector workflow. Drag each action to its purpose. Some source items are not used. The source items are as follows. The first source item is install the Azure Activity Solution from Content Hub. The second source item is launch the Azure Policy Assignment Wizard from the Azure Activity Connector and select the primary log analytics workspace. The third source item is create a syslog data collection rule for the subscription. The fourth source item is enable Defender for endpoint on all virtual machines. The target positions are destination Option A, make the Azure Activity Connector and related solution content available. Destination Option B, configure the Azure subscription to send its activity data to the Sentinel workspace. Map install the Azure Activity Solution from Content Hub. To make the Azure Activity Connector and related solution content available, map launch the Azure Policy Assignment Wizard from the Azure Activity Connector and select the primary log analytics workspace. To configure the Azure subscription to send its activity data to the Sentinel workspace. Current Sentinel connector workflows are solution-based. Installing the Azure Activity Solution exposes the connector and related content. The connector then uses the Azure Policy Assignment Wizard to configure the selected scope to stream Azure activity to the Sentinel-enabled log analytics workspace. A useful examination rule is this. For many Sentinel connectors, first install the solution from Content Hub, then configure the connector according to its ingestion mechanism. We will now analyze question number 116. Review the scenario carefully. A security engineer needs to search the Microsoft 365 Unified Audit Log for supported user and administrator operations while working in the Microsoft Defender portal. Which experience should the engineer use? Compare the following options. Choice A. Audit in the Microsoft Defender portal and create an audit log search. Choice B. Advanced hunting against device network events only. Choice C. Microsoft Sentinel incidents. Choice D. Defender for cloud attack path analysis. The required response is option A. Audit in the Microsoft Defender portal and create an audit log search. This is correct because the audit experience in the Microsoft Defender portal exposes the same unified audit log search capability provided by Microsoft Purview Audit. The engineer can filter by activities, users, and time range, and then search the audit records. The other choices do not satisfy the requirement because B. Device network events is an endpoint hunting table and is not the Microsoft 365 Unified Audit Log. C. Sentinel incidents do not replace Purview Audit Search. D. Attack path analysis models exploitable cloud resource paths and does not query Microsoft 365 audit activity. Keep this examination point in mind. SC-500's Purview Audit objective is about querying the Unified Audit Log from the Defender XD or /Defender portal audit experience. Question number 117. Highlights an important distinction. This is a hard-level item, so avoid choosing too quickly. This scenario establishes the key requirement. A security team connects a Google Cloud project to Microsoft Defender for Cloud and chooses least privilege access. Defender for Cloud generates a cloud onboarding script that must establish cross-cloud authentication and scoped access to the selected project. Which two types of resources or configurations are created by the generated onboarding process? Select 2. Select all answers that apply. The relevant choices are as follows. Option A. A workload identity pool and workload identity provider. Option B. Service accounts and project-level policy bindings for the selected Defender capabilities. Option C. An Azure VPN gateway inside the GCP project. Option D. A Microsoft Sentinel Log Analytics workspace inside GCP. Option E. A Microsoft Entra conditional access policy for GCP administrators. The choices that satisfy the requirement are Option A. A workload identity pool and workload identity provider, and Option B. Service accounts and project-level policy bindings for the selected Defender capabilities. The key reason is the Defender for Cloud GCP onboarding workflow uses workload identity federation and creates the required workload identity resources. It also creates service accounts and scoped project policy bindings needed by the Defender plans and capabilities selected during onboarding. Now consider why the remaining options are unsuitable. C. A VPN gateway is not part of Defender for Cloud connector authentication. D. Log Analytics workspaces are Azure resources and are not created inside the GCP project by this connector script. E. Conditional access for GCP administrators is not part of the Defender for Cloud GCP connector deployment. Exam tip. Multi-cloud connectors rely on cloud-native identities and least privilege permissions rather than VPN tunnels or copied long-lived credentials. Question number 118. Scenario. A data security team needs detailed visibility into AI interactions, including the user, AI application, activity type, sensitive information types, referenced files, and prompt/response details when permissions allow. Which Microsoft Purview DSPM for AI experience should the team use? Choice A. Activity Explorer. Choice B. Content Explorer in Information Protection. Choice C. Microsoft Sentinel Incidents. Choice D. Azure Network Watcher. The best answer is Option A, Activity Explorer. The requirement is satisfied because DSPM for AI Activity Explorer provides detailed AI activity records, including users, applications, activity types, sensitive information types, reference files, and AI interaction details such as prompts and responses when the required permissions and data are available. The incorrect choices fail for the following reasons. B. Information Protection Content Explorer focuses on classified content rather than the detailed DSPM for AI interaction event stream. C. Sentinel incidents are security operation cases rather than the DSPM AI activity detail experience. D. Network Watcher is unrelated to AI data security activity. Use DSPM for AI reports for summarized trends and Activity Explorer when you need interaction-level evidence and detail. Proceed to question number 119. This question moves us into Defender for Cloud Framework. An organization has assigned a NIST security standard in Microsoft Defender for Cloud and uses the regulatory compliance experience to evaluate its environment. For each statement, select yes if the statement is true. Otherwise, select no. Review Statement 1. Automatically accessible controls can show resources as compliant or non-compliant. Review Statement 2. A control that Defender for Cloud cannot automatically assess can appear unavailable or grayed out. Review Statement 3. The organization must remove the entire standard whenever one control cannot be automatically assessed. Statement 1 should be marked yes. Defender for Cloud evaluates supported assessments within the assigned framework. Statement 2 should be marked yes. Not every compliance control has an automated Defender for Cloud assessment. Statement 3 should be marked no. Unavailable controls can remain part of the assigned framework even though Defender for Cloud cannot determine their automated compliance state. The key takeaway is regulatory compliance dashboards combine automated cloud assessments with framework controls that might still require manual or procedural evidence. Now consider question number 120. Consider this scenario. A developer has an eligible contributor assignment for an Azure subscription through Microsoft Entra Privileged Identity Management. Every activation must require multi-factor authentication and justification, and an activation must never remain active for more than 2 hours. Where should you configure these requirements? Option A. In the PIM role settings for the contributor role at the Azure subscription scope. Option B. In an Azure policy assignment at the subscription scope. Option C. In a custom contributor role definition. Option D. In the subscription's resource lock settings. The appropriate choice is option A. In the PIM role settings for the contributor role at the Azure subscription scope. The reasoning is as follows. PIM role settings for Azure resources control activation requirements for eligible Azure RBAC assignments, including multi-factor authentication, justification, approval, and maximum activation duration. The remaining options are incorrect because B. Azure policy evaluates and enforces resource configuration and does not control PIM activation. C. A custom role changes permissions but does not configure activation behavior for an eligible assignment. D. Resource locks protect resources from modification or deletion and do not govern privileged role activation. Remember this distinction for the exam. For eligible Azure RBAC assignments, activation controls such as MFA, justification, approval, and duration belong in PIM role settings for the Azure resource role. Proceed to question number 121. Scenario. Privileged Microsoft Entra administrators must access Microsoft Cloud resources only after phishing-resistant multi-factor authentication. Password plus SMS and password plus push notification must not satisfy the policy. Which 2 conditional access settings should you configure? Select 2. More than one answer may be correct. Available choices. Choice A. Include the required Microsoft Entra directory roles in the policy assignment. Choice B. Use the require authentication strength grant control with the built-in phishing-resistant MFA strength. Choice C. Use only the require multi-factor authentication grant control. Choice D. Configure sign-in frequency to 1 hour. Choice E. Require a password change at every sign-in. Select option A. Include the required Microsoft Entra directory roles in the policy assignment, and option B. Use the require authentication strength grant control with the built-in phishing-resistant MFA strength. Here is the technical justification. Conditional access can target privileged directory roles and can require a specific authentication strength. The built-in phishing-resistant MFA strength accepts phishing-resistant methods such as FIDO2/passkeys, Windows Hello for Business, and qualifying certificate-based authentication rather than weaker MFA combinations. C. Generic require multi-factor authentication can be satisfied by methods that are not phishing-resistant. D. Sign-in frequency is a session control and does not restrict the allowed authentication method. E. Requiring password change does not implement phishing-resistant authentication. A useful examination rule is this. If the requirement names phishing-resistant MFA, use conditional access authentication strength rather than the generic MFA grant control. Question number 122. A security team is selecting phishing-resistant Microsoft Entra authentication methods for different user scenarios. Drag each authentication method to the description that best matches it. Review the available source items. Source item 1. FIDO2 security key. Source item 2. Windows Hello for Business. Source item 3. Microsoft Entra certificate-based authentication. Match the source items to these destinations. Destination A. A roaming hardware authenticator that can be carried between compatible devices. Destination B. A device-bound Windows credential protected by a PIN or biometric. Destination C. Authentication based on an X.509 certificate trusted by Microsoft Entra ID. The correct destination for FIDO2 security key is a roaming hardware authenticator that can be carried between compatible devices. The correct destination for Windows Hello for Business is a device-bound Windows credential protected by a PIN or biometric. The correct destination for Microsoft Entra certificate-based authentication is authentication based on an X.509 certificate trusted by Microsoft Entra ID. FIDO2 security keys are portable hardware authenticators. Windows Hello for Business creates a strong device-bound credential unlocked by a PIN or biometric. Microsoft Entra certificate-based authentication authenticates users with trusted X.509 certificates. Keep this examination point in mind. The phishing-resistant authentication family includes FIDO2/passkeys, Windows Hello for Business, and supported certificate-based authentication, but their credential form and deployment model differ. The next item is question number 123. Review the situation. A GitHub Actions workflow deploys Azure resources by using a Microsoft Entra app registration. The security team must eliminate stored client secrets and certificates from GitHub while retaining automated sign-in. What should you configure on the app registration? The options are: Choice A. A federated identity credential that trusts the GitHub Open ID Connect issuer and the required repository subject. Choice B. A new client secret with a 1-year expiration. Choice C. A SAML single sign-on configuration. Choice D. A system-assigned managed identity on the GitHub repository. In this case, select option A. A federated identity credential that trusts the GitHub Open ID Connect issuer and the required repository subject. This is correct because Workload Identity Federation lets a Microsoft Entra app registration trust tokens from an external Open ID Connect identity provider, such as GitHub. The GitHub workflow can exchange its OIDC token for a Microsoft Entra Access token without storing a client secret or certificate. The alternatives can be eliminated because B. A client secret remains a stored credential that must be protected and rotated. C. SAML SSO is for interactive application sign-in and does not solve this workload automation requirement. D. A system-assigned managed identity is created for supported Azure resources, not for a GitHub repository. Exam tip. For external CI/CD platforms that support OIDC, Workload Identity Federation removes the need for long-lived Microsoft Entra application credentials. Now consider question number 124. Consider this scenario. A Microsoft Entra tenant disables normal user consent to applications, but enables the admin consent workflow and assigns designated reviewers. For each statement, select yes if the statement is true. Otherwise, select no. Statement 1. A user who cannot consent to an application can submit a request for admin approval. Statement 2. Merely being designated as a reviewer automatically gives the reviewer permission to grant every requested Microsoft Graph permission. Statement 3. A reviewer can block an application so future admin consent requests for that application are prevented. Statement 1 should be marked yes. The workflow provides an approval-required experience through which the user can request admin consent. Statement 2 should be marked no. Reviewer status does not grant additional Microsoft Entra consent privileges. Statement 3 should be marked yes. Blocking rejects the request and prevents new requests for that application. Admin consent workflow separates request routing from authorization to grant consent. Reviewers still need the required Microsoft Entra role permissions. You have completed Set 3 of the SC-500 Microsoft Security Operations Analyst Associate Practice question series. How did you score? Share your result in the comments. Work through all the sets to build broader exam readiness and cover more practice questions. Please like this video, subscribe to Tech with Koushik, and enable notifications for more certification exam preparation content. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in another practice set.